What's up, my Yu-Gi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! In Business Casual. So yes, we are hitting part 3 of the Banlist According to Logic video series for July 2014. Now, this is likely to be my last video in this series for this format, unless you guys want me to do a recap video, in which case let me know in the comment section below. Before I can get to talking about cards that may get a bump back up on the ban list, I should address a couple of cards that I forgot that could be important from the last video. So the first one is Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now the thing about Anti-Spell Fragrance is it unilaterally shuts down the pendulum mechanic, since Anti-Spell Fragrance forces you to set spell cards before they can be activated, and pendulum monsters become spell cards that you cannot set when you activate them. You cannot use pendulum monsters while Anti-Spell Fragrance is on the board, unless of course you just normal summon them. So the pendulum mechanic is entirely shut down by Anti-Spell Fragrance. So it is something that we need to talk about because we are getting pendulums in the next couple of sets, including the next starter deck. So that is something that Konami is going to be looking at. This card has no reprints in the near future, and it doesn't really help any decks kind of in a positive function except to help them beat pendulums. Of course, there aren't really any particularly spectacular pendulum archetypes or anything like that coming out in the near future. We have to wait, I think, 2 sets before we get Cliff-Offs, so we aren't necessarily going to be getting any real support, but it is something that Konami is going to want to take care of. It is a Floodgate card, which Konami typically has a problem with, but instead of being like other Floodgate cards, which have a massive MST weakness, this one doesn't really, because you have to wait an entire turn before you can use that MST, which means that you basically have to wait 2 turns, you have to waste 2 turns in order to take out the Anti-Spell Fragrance that stops your pendulum mechanic, which is a major problem if Konami wants to sell the pendulum monsters, because MST, even the card that is normally used against this kind of problem, is not that useful because it's so slow. So what I think will probably, or what I hope will probably happen, is that the card will get banned. I don't really like Floodgate cards for the most part, and I really don't like them when they're a card that, like, you're unlikely to get, but if you just get that one, then you win the game. But I think that Konami tends to actually make things like that, for instance, Macrocosmos, D-Fissure, and Soul Drain, so I think it's entirely likely that they're just going to limit Anti-Spell Fragrance this format. The other card that I have to talk about is, of course, Black Horn of Heaven. This was discussed a lot in the comments section in the last video, because Black Horn of Heaven is very comparable to Compulsory Evacuation Device in its uses against the meta, since it destroys the use of Synchro and Xyz monsters. It does not, however, unlike Compulsory, stop fusion summons. For instance, anything in the Shadow archetype. It does work really well against Tellarknights and Light Sworns, but against basically everything else in this meta, it isn't that useful, especially going into what's it called? I've totally forgotten the set now. Duelist Alliance. This card isn't going to be nearly as useful as it used to be, except against decks that are already turning into profit sinks for Konami. So even though this card is comparable to Compulsory Evacuation Device, which did get limited a while back, I really hope that this card does not get hit, and I do not think it will get hit. It's just we need to discuss it because of its compatibility with Compulsory Evacuation Device. So let's get on to what you guys are really here for, bumping up in the ban list, cards that may make a comeback this format. So I have a little bit of a color coding for this video. Any card that is in black text is just something that I need to discuss. If it's in purple text, it is a wish list item. If it's in red text, it's conditional as to whether it comes back. And if it's in green text, I think it's almost guaranteed to come back. If not this format, then in the next one. So let's start off with Glow Up Bulb. This is actually one that I kind of thought of on the fly a little while back. Glow Up Bulb has been banned for a substantial amount of time, and for very good reasons, but now there's actually a planned archetype in the game that is making Konami a lot of money, and that archetype is Sylvans. Sylvans are really effective with Glow Up Bulb, not because of the milling mechanic, which Glow Up Bulb cannot trigger because Glow Up Bulb does not excavate, but because of the fact that Glow Up Bulb can get into the graveyard so easily and extend combos for the Sylvan deck. Sylvans are good for profit because they are really high profit items in Primal Origin, and they're also really good for the reprints that are coming out in the next tin, for things like Felgrand and Dragasack. Glow Up Bulb would also be really good for the 5D's Legendary Collection in terms of profit, because it's likely to get a good reprint in the Legendary Collection. It would be especially good for me if I got my Wish and Tengu came back to 3, but I'll talk about that in a second. And finally, Shadows are likely to get an Earth fusion monster, which means that you could use Shadow Fusion to send Glow Up from the deck to the graveyard, get your Earth Fusion, and then use Glow Up Bulb for synchro plays after that, which would be pretty darn cool if you ask me in terms of Shadow. So Glow Up Bulb actually has a substantial probability of coming back. I think it's... I can't actually say whether I think that it's really likely or not that it will. It does have these things going for it, but it was kind of a pivotal card a few formats back, especially with Lone Fire at 2 right now. Glow Up Bulb may be a little bit too much for Konami, especially if, once again, I get my Wish and Tengu comes back to 3, and we might see the revival of Plant Synchro, and that may or may not be very good for Konami in terms of reprints and things like that. So Glow Up Bulb is a really interesting item to talk about right now, but I'm not certain that it's going to be coming back in this format. Zen Mighty is just a little bit of a wish list item. I really like wind-ups. I think they're an extremely skillful deck, especially now that Magician's only at 1 and they don't have any big loops. Zen Mighty in the game wouldn't do that much for the deck. I just like the wind-up mechanic, so I just kind of wish that Zen Mighty would come back, especially since it wouldn't really wreck the metagame right now. Dragon Ravine is one that's really conditional. Dragon Ravine is only likely to come back if the Dragon Rulers get banned, but if they do, I think it's almost guaranteed that Dragon Ravine is going to make a comeback, because Dragon Rulers were the only real threat for this card. And if the Dragon Rulers are gone, then Ravine may be coming back into the game. Particularly with rumors running around that Dragoonity might get support soon. I've just heard the rumors. I haven't seen anything substantial to tell me that that's at all likely to happen, but it is something that we can talk about. Heavy Storm is another one that we need to talk about because artifacts are in the game. So Heavy Storm isn't actually all that good a card if you think that you're going to be facing off against artifacts, particularly if Konami does not hit any of the artifacts in the TCG this format. It's another little bit of a conditional thing. If they don't hit Moral Talk or they don't hit Theosophy, we are fairly likely to see Heavy Storm come back because the decks that are going to be going into the next format that lose to back row basically don't exist. I can't think of a deck that Konami will want to sell in the near future that's really going to lose to Heavy Storm. So Heavy Storm to 1 is a possibility. It hasn't been banned for very long, and Konami, when they limit things, they can come back fairly soon, but when they ban things, it usually takes a while for them to come back. So since Heavy Storm was banned less than a year ago, I think it's a little unlikely that Heavy Storm is going to come back this format. Onto the things that are at 1 right now that might see a comeback. We'll start off with Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. I talked about this in one of my recent videos, how Chaos Sorcerer could come to 3 and BLS could come to 2, and it would be really cool, and I would love for that to happen. Of course, I would want to have this in sequence. I don't want BLS and Chaos Sorcerer to make a comeback at the same time, but Chaos Sorcerer at 3 is something that I think is fairly likely to happen in the near future, and then a BLS bump back up to 2 would be kind of in the works from there. Blackwing Gale is another thing that people talk about a lot coming back. That and Bestiari are two things that people who like the two decks that they go well with, who they talk about these two cards coming back up to 2. I don't see them really doing anything if they come back up to 2, so I don't think that's really going to be a problem. It's just there have been so many opportunities for these two cards to come back that I lose faith in their ability to come back up on the Forbidden and Limited list. Let's move on to Formula Synchron and Birdman, another two cards that I don't really think would make a huge difference in this game. Birdman's limited right now because of its various its uses with Divine Wind and Mist Valley and stuff like that, and the possible loops, but Divine Wind and Mist Valley is now limited as well, so Birdman is not nearly as broken as it used to be. I would like to see it come back, and especially Formula Synchron. Formula Synchron is doing so little in this current meta, and it does support the Cosmic Dragon archetype. They very rarely make it, but it is something that's there if they want to include an extra Formula Synchron, since they have now, I believe, 2 level 1 tuners. I'm not entirely certain on that, but Formula Synchron really wouldn't do much coming back to 2. Librarian would do a substantial amount coming back to 2, especially if Glow Up Bulb is back, so it is still just a wish list item. I don't think it's actually going to happen because Librarian is actually a really good card, unlike Formula Synchron, which was only really a good card because Librarian was a good card. And then 1-for-1 I have in green because 1-for-1 has been around for a really long time and there's really no reason for it to still be at 1 because, let's see, if Infernities get hit, we haven't even seen Infernities use Mirage in a long time, so that's not even going to be really a problem. I just don't see 1-for-1 doing a whole lot in the current meta, unless, of course, Glow Up Bulb comes back to 1. But I think that 1-for-1 is kind of due for a bump back on the list. Transmigration Prophecy is another thing that is very conditional. If they limit the Dragon Rulers, or if they ban the Dragon Rulers, sorry, I can see it coming back, because if they don't, it means that they're really trying to push that Ruler Sworn deck, and Transmigration Prophecy is a really big issue for that deck, because if they banish their JDs for Eclipse Wyvern, then you put the Eclipse Wyvern back in their deck, then they totally lose those JDs forever. So I think Transmigration Prophecy could come back to 2, seeing as it hasn't done a whole lot in the current meta, but if they brought it back to 2, it would be only if they hit the Lightsworn Ruler deck. Tengu to 3 is one thing that I've wanted to have happen for a long time. I don't think Tengu would make a huge difference in the game, and since the hands are around, like, it really has been put in perspective as not being nearly as good a card as it used to be, especially since we have fewer synchro plays in the current game, and it does require a normal summon to put on the board in the first place. So I think that it's coming to 3 would be nice because I really like the card, but as long as Tenki is in the game, I think it might be a little bit unlikely. The next thing is Summoner Monk. Summoner Monk really isn't doing anything in the current meta, but it would do something for heroes. So once that new hero structure deck comes out and Shadow Mist is a thing, 3 Summoner Monks would make the deck fairly consistent in getting that Shadow Mist into Mask Change play that you can do with this card. So I think Summoner Monk coming to 3 would not be an issue at all. Harpies are really the only deck that I can see right now kind of abusing that card because of Hysteric Sign plus Monk, but really that's an extremely inconsistent combo for the deck since neither of the cards are searchable for the deck, so I don't think Monk is a really big problem. Reasoning is another card that I think may see a comeback. The only reason why it might not, I guess, is because of, I don't know, like, I really can't think of any reason why Reasoning is still at 2 and not at 3. And then finally, I've talked about Chaos Sorcerer coming back to 3 in that last video. So that's my discussion about cards that could make a comeback on the next ban list. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. And of course, subscribe for more decks discussion and analysis and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Meanwhile, thank you guys for watching. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.